Welcome to Building My Legacy podcast. This podcast is designed for leaders and entrepreneurs who want to leave a legacy and will provide strategies that focus upon key elements for legacy creation, determining your desired impact and its benefit, increasing your legacy's reach by engaging key stakeholders, planning, prioritizing, and executing. Here's your host, Dr. Lois Sonstegard.
Welcome, everybody, to today's Building My Legacy podcast. I have with me today Candace Plattor. Candace is interesting because she is so willing to share her story of how she got into the work that she's engaged in. She is an addictions therapist in private practice, and she specializes in working with families and other loved ones of people who are struggling with their various addictions. And she has a signature family and therapy program called Family Addiction Counseling and Therapy Program. She's a former opioid addict and has been clean for almost 35 years and sober. Congratulations to you for that. That's a lot of effort that goes into that. Candace has learned that overcoming addiction is a family condition. Everyone in the family is affected by addiction, and everyone needs to heal. And so we really want to talk a lot about that today, Candace, because I think so often we put the person in treatment and then wonder why when they come home, things don't go as smoothly as we would like them to. So if you would share how your story, why opiate addiction, how did you get into it, and then your move from that to being a therapist.
Okay. And feel free to interrupt if I just keep talking. Feel free to interrupt me. Hi, everyone. So I think the really kind of relevant part of my story started in the early 70s when I was on a cross-country trip with somebody I thought I was going to marry. That didn't work out, but we were having a fine trip, and then I suddenly became very, very ill. We went for lunch somewhere, and I became very ill, which is, not a great thing to have happen on a road trip. So I thought maybe I had food poisoning, but it didn't turn out to be food poisoning. It turned out to be Crohn's disease. And it took a while for that to be diagnosed because that was a new disease on the block kind of thing. Doctors really didn't know about it. They knew about colitis, but they didn't know about Crohn's at that point. So it was a very, people were telling me it was all in my head. The doctors didn't know what to do for me. What the doctors did, in their defense, they wanted to help me. And they didn't know what else to do. So they threw a lot of addictive medication at me. They gave me Valium and different Valium drugs. They gave me codeine and morphine and opioids, other kinds of opioids, and just all kinds of things that I became addicted to because anybody's body would become addicted to those things. And Crohn's disease, if anybody has it or knows somebody who has it, it's a very painful, debilitating, difficult to manage disease. And I was very, very ill. And so those drugs did help me, but they were giving me as much of them as I wanted, like week after week and month after month and year after year. And I was also smoking pot because that helped as well, and I liked the feeling of it. I found myself in a really bad place with all of those. If you fast forward about 15 years, I was heavily addicted to them. And I didn't realize I was heavily addicted because addiction wasn't on the radar at that time, not the way it is today, for sure. And all of those drugs and substances are depressants in the human body. So 15 years later, I am so depressed that I'm suicidal. And I start thinking about, I'm not sure I want to live anymore. Like, this is just too hard. And I have all these pills that I could take. And I started thinking about that. And I was quite serious about it. I went and I reached out for help instead of taking my life. And I'm so glad about that. I reached out for help and I called the Vancouver Crisis Center. I'm in Canada, Vancouver, and somebody there saved my life. Somebody there, I can't even remember if it was a man or a woman, but they took me seriously and they listened, and I cried, and they suggested somebody that I could go and see. I did that, and she suggested that I sign myself into a psych ward,
Wow.
which I did.
Wow.
I signed myself into the psych ward of the local hospital here, and I was there for about a month because I was afraid that if you gave me my clothes, I would go and kill myself. And while I was there, I met a few other people who were trying to stay off drugs and alcohol. And they were going to 12-step meetings across the street at the nurses' residence every day at noon. And so I started going with them to Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous. And what the people there did was they let me cry. They let me just weep. And they listened to me when I shared. And they came and hugged me afterwards and said, keep coming back. And in my experience, my family experience, nobody ever told me to keep coming back, So when I heard that, I just kept coming back. And I think I went to those meetings for about 10 years of my recovery. And then I stopped going to them. But, that was the beginning of my recovery. And, one day at a time, as they say, I'm 34 years clean and sober.
It is so easy to step into an addiction, isn't it? Because there are a lot of tools and aids. Like if you've had surgery, you get opioids, which makes sense. If you have any number of chronic conditions, back pains, etc., we've gotten smarter about it, I think, in many ways, but that still exists.
Yeah, it still exists, unfortunately. Yeah.
So if you're a family member, what do you suggest to family members who see this, watch this, spouses, for example, or a parent of a child?
Yeah.
Interventions, we hear about them, but what's really the best approach when you see it happening?
Yeah, I think, it depends on the kind of intervention you're talking about. If you're talking about the kind that's on TV, I'm not a big fan of those. I'm not a big fan of, all the family members descending upon the addict and telling them all the things they've done wrong and reading them their letters. And, that's made for TV. And I think when that's done with an addict in real life, that it's very shaming. It's a very traumatic experience. But, family members, it's so hard for the family members because there's a lot of help out there for people who are addicted, but there's very little help for people who love the people who are addicted. And that's one of the reasons that I work primarily with families that have addicted loved ones, because there's very little out there for them. And they, first of all, they need to trust what they're seeing. They need to be real with what they're seeing. So, it's easy to say, oh, it's not really that bad. And, I can, it's okay. It's just a phase and they'll grow out of that and they'll stop. And that's not usually what happens with addiction. It hardly ever happens with addiction, that it stops, that somebody grows out of it. Addiction is one of those things that it's progressive. It has something called tolerance because you need more and more of the same thing. Your body starts tolerating these drugs and you need more and more to get the same kind of high. So when family members don't intervene in some kind of way, the addiction usually just gets worse and the whole family is thrown into turmoil. Everybody, like you said in the introduction, everybody's affected. Everybody needs to heal. So, um, so the loved ones, the family members, they need to reach out for help about this and find out what to do. But unfortunately, there aren't a lot of people like me who are working primarily with that. There aren't people who are specializing in this, and we need way more people because there are millions of families all over the world who are affected by this. So, but families need to learn how to really love the person that's addicted in a way that's going to help them.
What does that mean?
Because, there's a difference between helping and enabling somebody.
And what's the difference?
When we enable, the difference is when we enable somebody, we are, my definition of enabling is basically when you're doing something for somebody else that they need to be doing and should be doing for themselves. When we do that over and over for like, for example, I don't want to be sexist here, but let's just say a man is addicted to alcohol and he is missing work and he can't get up in the morning because he's hungover. And his wife calls his workplace and says, he's sick, he can't come to work today. And when that kind of thing keeps happening over and over again, that's enabling.
Got it.
Even if it happens once, it's enabling, actually. So loved ones have to learn how to not do those kinds of things and to let the addicts start to experience their own consequences for this. And loved ones need to be able to set boundaries with the addicts in their lives. I think it's a more loving act to set a boundary than it is to let this continue and continue.
Yes.
So this is what I teach. I teach people how to language a boundary. What boundary do you want to set? What are you ready to set? What are you ready to do? Because for every family, it could be different in the same situation. So what are you ready to do? How do you want to do this? How do you say it? How do you maintain the boundary when the going gets rough and the addict pushes back? Because they will. Addicts don't usually come and say, thank you so much for setting these wonderful boundaries for me, So these are the kinds of things that the families need to learn, because otherwise nothing will change. And if nothing changes, nothing changes. So
Candace, tell me, when does a person go from using, let's say, opioids to an addiction? At what point do you cross that line? And how do the family member know, okay, we've crossed the line now we need help?
Yeah. Well, with opioids, I would say that it doesn't take long at all, because opioids are extremely addictive in the human system. And people want more and more and more. And they keep, what happens is you take a drug like that and you have a good experience. You have this wonderful high and it feels really wonderful. I used to love being high. I know that feeling and I know how good it can feel. And the next time they use it, maybe it feels really good. And then the next time they use it, maybe it doesn't feel quite as good as those first couple of times. So they take a little more. They take a little more just to see if they can get that same kind of buzz. And maybe they get that buzz and they get really high and they love it. And the next time they take even more. And this is how overdoses happen. Because people are using too much, trying to chase that high. But to be going back to your question, an opioid is a very addictive substance. It's going to happen quickly. And the family, if you're a family member of somebody, you think they're using opioids or anything else really, in an unhealthy way. And I don't really know of anybody that's a social heroin user. Like opioids are not meant to be socially used. They're meant to keep somebody addicted to it. That's what they do. And if you think that you have an addict in your family, if you even suspect that somebody's addicted to something or becoming addicted, you're probably right. And so I would say trust yourself, trust some of the different behaviors that you're seeing, trust the anger that you start to see or the sullenness that you start to see, different people that they're hanging out with, sleeping all day, they're up all night, they're sleeping all day. Those kinds of changes in somebody, trust yourself when you see those.
So let's say you're a family member and you notice that there's some addictive behavior. How does one approach the person? Because so often it ends in explosion and not a good result in terms of really getting help. So how does one approach it so you actually are helpful?
Yes, that's such a wonderful question. There's not an easy answer for it. Again, if you can reach out for help from a professional who knows how to help you, that would probably be a good idea. That's what we do at Love with Boundaries, is we work with families just like that. We work with families all over the world. Zoom has been miraculous for us. What needs to happen is that the message that the family members give to the addict is, we love you. We love you so much. We don't like what we're seeing here. We're really scared about this. We love you enough to tell you that we're not okay with this. And we're going to get some help with this, or we're going to set some boundaries with this, or whatever it is that they're going to do, and do it from a place of love, not a place of punishment. It's not a place of get out of my house, but it is a question of, we love you so much that we're going to, and we care about other family members here. We're not, if you're going to choose to use drugs, you'll have to do it somewhere else. You're not going to be allowed to do it in the home anymore. So you need to make a decision about this, and we'll help you get some help for yourself. We'll support recovery, but we will not support your addiction anymore. And that's because we love you, not because we don't. That's the basic message.
So, Candace, so often when you watch families going through addiction with a member, you see the person going in treatment, out of treatment. It's a ping pong effect. Why is that? And are there ways that you can get past that so you can get treated and stay well, healthy?
Yeah, and again, you're asking wonderful questions, and this happens all the time, so often, because as I keep saying, the whole family needs to be helped and the whole family needs to heal. When that doesn't happen, when there are dysfunctional patterns that are happening in the family, you take the addict out of the family, even if the addict doesn't live at home anymore, but you take them out of the dysfunctional pattern of the family, you put him or her, you put them into treatment and pay a lot of money for treatment. In Canada and the US, it can cost up to, $60,000 to $100,000 for 30 days of treatment.
Wow.
And in many, many places, they don't work with the family very much at all, if at all. Now, some of them have family days where the family comes in, they get some education about addiction, and then they go home. They learn maybe about addiction a little bit, but they learn some things that I don't agree with. But we can maybe touch on that later. But then they go home and they don't actually get any counseling, and they don't actually get any ongoing counseling. So the family goes home and is expected to sort of do this all themselves, to figure this out. So the addict is in treatment away from the family. The family doesn't know what to do. They've got some information now, but they don't know how to use it really. And maybe the addict's doing well. Maybe the addict has decided to change his life and do some things differently, and maybe wants to stay clean and sober. Maybe makes that decision. Some addicts don't want to be in treatment. They go to treatment, they find ways to get kicked out of treatment, or they just leave. And the family who has paid for the treatment usually doesn't get reimbursed for all that money they paid for the treatment. So let's say the addict wants to do well. So the addict stays there for 30 days, feeling really strong. They're 30 days clean and sober. They've been going to support groups and getting counseling and, have some friends now who are clean and sober. And then they go back into the family dynamic, which has basically remained the same. And the addicts become really overwhelmed. They don't know how to handle that because there wasn't any counseling for the whole family, including the addict. And generally what happens is that the addict chooses to relapse because of that feeling of being overwhelmed. And the family says, how could this happen? How could this happen? We paid so much money for this.
How could it happen? Boy,
yeah. And it happens so often.
Yeah. Look, can I just take
and that's exactly why it happens.
Because they're not all having the opportunity. Can we just take a step backwards right now? Because we're hearing so much about the influx of drugs into our communities, especially here in the US.
Yes.
And some that are really horrible drugs like fentanyl. And if you're a family, what are the things you can do preventatively so that your family can be healthy? How do you do this so you don't walk into the addiction? And I think sometimes with kids, it's so innocent. It just happens. But there must,
It happens, and it happens because kids in school are doing it. Kids on the school bus at very early ages now are doing it. So I really agree with what you're saying, that prevention is a really important thing. And prevention about enabling is also a really important thing that nobody talks about. But if you can get to prevention when your children are young, when your children are, 8, 9, 10, they're going to start hearing about this. They're going to start seeing it in their schools, and if you can talk to your children about this and have open dialogue about drug use and the pitfalls of it, that would be really good. Not enough families do that. I mean, there's so much peer pressure. There's so much pressure to get into these really unhealthy behaviors, and kids are kids. So prevention is a really good thing. But once the parents do that, again, if they start to see differences in their children, if they start to see differences in behavior, they need to be on that as soon as possible. They need to be working with somebody like me as soon as possible.
You talk about self-respect and self-care. And to me, part of prevention is self-care and self-respect. And for you, it's also part of treatment. So talk a little bit about that, if you would, please.
Yeah, I will. I would love to. I have, over the years, become a queen of self-care. And it has changed my life because I have a life today, even with Crohn's. My Crohn's is so much better, and it's usually not a disease that gets better. So it's really about caring enough about oneself to do what's right for us and to take good care of ourselves and to eat well and to get enough sleep and to do that. When you've got addiction in your life, those are really hard things to do, because your life just goes into full chaos. And one of the things that I was going to mention before, many family members of people with addiction, as they're enabling their addicts, as they don't want to face reality and they're enabling, Mom, I need $20. Oh, and they give an addict $20. They know where that money's going to go, but they give it to them anyway because they don't like conflict and they want to stay away from conflict. It's like, nobody's ever taught them how to deal with conflict in a healthy way. And so they're very scared of it. And addicts who hear the word no can be incredibly confrontational. Physically, emotionally, verbally, they can be very hard to deal with. So sometimes the families just say yes, and they just keep doing that. And that doesn't help at all. that's the one thing to not continue to do. This is why enabling is such an important thing. So one of the pieces of self-care is to learn how to put your own needs on the front burner, how to take care of yourself first before you try to take care of other people, before you get into what you need to do for others. If you don't do that, it's that classic story of being on the airplane, when the masks come down and you've been told to put your own mask on first, but you're with a child or you're with somebody who's sick or elderly, and it's so tempting to put their mask on first, to put everybody's mask on first. And when you've got somebody who's used to not taking care of themselves, who's used to putting other people's needs ahead of their own on a pretty consistent basis, then that person is going to want to put the mask on everybody else while she's lying on the floor of the airplane because she can't breathe anymore because her mask isn't on. So we need to take care of ourselves first. It's not a selfish act to do that. It's a self-caring act. And then we can give to others. Otherwise, we get completely depleted and we get sick. And a lot of other things happen when we don't take care of ourselves.
It is so true.
Yeah.
It is so true.
Yeah.
Candace, our time has flown by. It is almost up. What have we not talked about that we should have talked about that our audience really needs to know? Okay. Well, if you're in this situation, I really want to tell you that this can change. This can heal. And we want to try to heal it before you lose your addicted loved one to an overdose or to something like that. We want to, so I want to work with you, or somebody like myself needs to work with you to be able to put some things in motion to get this halted. We can stop this. We can do this. I have so many families that are now not having to deal with addiction anymore. So one of the things we do at Love with Boundaries, we teach you how to love with boundaries, but we also give a free 30-minute consultation to anyone who fills out one of our questionnaires. And I think you might have that link. If not, I can give it to you. It's on my website, lovewithboundaries.com. And if you fill that out, and once we get it, we'll be back in touch with you and we'll set up that 30-minute consultation for free. It'll be telephone or Zoom, and you can tell us about your particular situation. We'll tell you how we might be able to help you. So we work with families all over the world. And we would love to hear from you if you're having trouble. But this, I think what I really want to say is don't give up, because this is healable. This is preventable, and this is healable. What a glorious note to end on, that optimism of it doesn't have to be this way. If you're in addiction, it can be different. It can heal. You can heal.
Yes.
It's so wonderful, Candace. For those of you who are listening, I just also want to let you know that Candace is the author of 3 books. One is Loving an Addict, Loving Yourself, and there's a workbook also by the same title. And then she has a 3rd book, Self-Respect Sunday for Your Soul. It's a weekly journal. And we will have information about this and the links for it in the show notes. So we encourage you to go to Amazon. It's on Amazon.com and purchase that. And we'll also have the link for the assessment that Candace was speaking about. So you can be in contact, and there will be information about Candace, so you can reach her should you want somebody to talk with. Yeah. I have a team of absolutely wonderful counselors that work with me, and I've trained them in the way that I work with families. They're great counselors in their own right, and now they have my training and supervision as well. And we just work with all kinds of different families that have this issue going on. Candace, thank you. thank you for the hope that you
You're
bring
welcome.
and the healing that you
You're
bring.
welcome. Thank you, Lois.
Yep,
Yeah,
you're so welcome.
it's my pleasure.
And then for those of you who are listening, thank you for being with us today on Building My Legacy podcast. And be sure to visit our website as well at buildtomorrow.com. Again, thank you so much, Candace.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Lois. And bye, everyone.
You've been listening to Building My Legacy podcast with Dr. Lois Sonstegard. To book your appointment with Dr. Sonstegard, visit www.buildtomorrow.com.